You're blowing my fucking mind right now.
One of the first misconceptions is that people who use drugs, including people with addictions, have no control over their substance use. Good luck finding a job. Good luck being able to get custody of your kids. Good luck being able to find someone who wants to sign a lease to you.
So it's essentially, if not us, then nothing.
Then nothing.
For decades, addiction treatment has been built on one idea: quit completely or you've failed. But what if that's not the whole story? What if there is another way to move forward? That's where harm reduction comes in, a movement that's saving lives and reshaping how we think about drug use, recovery, and even how we show up for people we love. Welcome back to We Need to Talk with Dr. Darcy Sterling, where I give you the tools and skills you need to love better so you can live better. Traditional addiction treatment has been framed as an all or nothing battle. You either quit completely or you have failed. But a growing movement is challenging that idea. It's called harm reduction, and instead of demanding abstinence, it focuses on reducing the dangers that come with substance use, whether that is preventing overdoses, lowering the risk of disease, or simply creating a safer path towards change. Today we're asking, is harm reduction the breakthrough that addiction treatment has actually needed, or does it raise questions about how we define recovery? My guest today is Dr. Sheila Vakharia, one of the most influential voices in harm reduction. She's the managing director of the Department of Research and Academic Engagement at the Drug Policy Alliance. Sheila's work challenges the old abstinence-only policy, and she's here today to show us what harm reduction looks like in practice and why it matters to all of us. One last thing before we start. We have added a new segment at the very end of the show. It is the part that you'll catch yourself replaying in your head later. So don't skip that last minute. That's where the real shift happens. And while I've got you, hit follow or subscribe wherever you're listening. It is the simplest way to support the work we do here. Sheila, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure.
Now, I have met guests many different ways over the 2 seasons that I've been doing We Need to Talk, but never in the way that I met you. So for my listeners, as therapists, we are required to take continuing education courses to keep our licenses. And honestly, I go into those with the lowest expectations because even when a topic is of interest to me, the presentations are often so dry that I'm like counting the seconds until they're over. And I don't mean to be disrespectful to, I hope that that inspires people who are capable of giving great discussions to want to create CEUs and not diss the people who do them already and are dry, but maybe you could level up as well. But a few months ago, I took one of your classes and I was riveted by your command of the subject, the way you made complex ideas so easy to understand, and the passion you brought to this topic. And so when the class ended, I was a little disappointed that it was over, which is a first for me. And I'm practicing. I'm in my 30th year, so I'm not a rookie. I'm not easily intrigued or swooned by people, and I am really excited for that reason to continue this conversation with you today. No pressure.
I'm so touched. Thank you so much.
Of course, of course. So let's start with the basics. What is harm reduction? When did the term come into use, and what was happening in the world that made that necessary?
Harm reduction is a philosophy, a strategy, a movement, and a set of interventions to help people who engage in higher risk practices, such as using substances or drugs, engaging in sexual activity, to learn the strategies to stay safe and to reduce risk. And abstinence isn't the only way that we can be safe when we engage in high risk practices. But beyond those concrete tools and strategies that we offer people, it's also a broader philosophy about self-determination and autonomy and people being able to choose what they do with their bodies and still being worthy of care and support rather than being shunned or judged or told that help should be conditional upon them meeting some criteria. So that's kind of how I talk about and describe harm reduction. And the earliest roots of harm reduction as a movement that many of us pinpoint begin actually at the beginning of the HIV crisis in the early 1980s and in the 90s. You know, people who injected drugs and queer communities were coming down with a sickness that they couldn't really understand. They didn't know where they were getting it from. They didn't know how to treat it. And at that point, it was lethal. And there wasn't a lot of public support or even a lot of public urgency around helping these communities because both people who inject drugs and queer communities were then and still to this day are a highly stigmatized population. And so, really, the roots of harm reduction when it comes to injection drug use specifically was driven by people who injected drugs themselves who said, you know what, it could be that we're getting ourselves sick and each other sick because we're unfortunately forced to share the needles that we often use when we're injecting drugs. And perhaps if we found a way to secure a connection to a supplier so that we could always make sure that everyone's using new sterile syringes every time they use and that they're not forced to share with one another so we're safely disposing of them, we could actually keep our community safe. And so this is kind of what many of us point to as the origins of harm reduction as a movement, reducing the harms associated with injection drug use. And here we are 40, 50 years later, talking about this approach and philosophy in a much broader way, thinking about policy proposals, thinking about what this can look like in therapy, thinking about ways beyond just providing people sterile syringes to help them stay safe using other kinds of drugs, using other modalities, and then also around safer sex practices and all these other things.
I just got chills and was reminded by those chills why your discussion was so riveting. So I did not know that harm reduction is rooted in the queer community deciding, figuring out for themselves, wow, we might be getting ourselves sick by sharing these needles or by having unprotected sex. You're saying that it's rooted in the substance abuse world, the world of addiction, and in the queer community. Like people on the ground who were suffering were the ones who came up with this because policymakers were just tone deaf, certainly in the 80s. I graduated high school in the 80s. I know this late 80s. Can you speak more to that? Like, how
Yeah.
long did people need to speak about this before people would hear them?
Queer folks were realizing, especially gay men and trans women, were realizing it could be that some of our sexual practices could be contributing to this, right? And so they were among some of the first to say, let's think about condoms, but also let's think of other lower risk sexual practices. I believe you live in New York City, right? I live in New York City as well. There is still an exhibit going on for another couple of weeks at PS1, the art exhibit in Long Island City, where I would still recommend that you go if you get a chance, where you can actually see there's a photo exhibit by several gay men who have images and pamphlets and brochures and posters and the early messaging that they had for gay men and trans women around the different ways that they could start to engage in safer sex practices. And at the same time, you see injection drug users developing materials saying, you know, if you have to reuse your needle, cleaning it out with bleach might be a way to at least clear out some contaminants from your needle. If you have to reuse it again, later those practices have evolved and we no longer use that. But these were actual innovations that people developed for themselves, knowing the reality of like what it's like to have sex, knowing the reality of what it's like to engage in injection drug use. Telling people to just say no and to stop isn't pragmatic or realistic. So how about we think about all of the creative ways that we could, based on what we know about our own practices, incrementally reduce risk until we learn more about this virus?
So it essentially takes what used to be an abstinence only, a very binary viewpoint on, you know, if you were getting treatment, you were going to have to commit to being abstinent, 100% clean. It took this very black and white way of viewing risky behaviors, sex and drug usage, and said, you know what, if we can lower the risk, that's better than repulsing the masses by making the standards so ridiculously high that too many people are like, I can't do it.
The people who are most at risk need to be engaged with because every opportunity that we miss could be the acquisition and transmission of a disease that we were beginning to learn could be contained if we even just help them tweak some of their behaviors, adjust some of their behaviors, take a different approach. And it affirms humanity, it affirms autonomy, and it actually says you do have control and power and you exercise it every day. How about you just try it in this kind of way instead, right? So it didn't make people feel pathologized. It didn't make them feel powerless. If anything, it empowered them to try something new. And what was wild is that the science followed the mutual aid, right? It was people experimenting and doing this on their own long before the CDC or the National
Hmm.
Institute of Health decided to study whether these strategies worked. Long before that infrastructure even came in to study it, people were experimenting on the ground themselves, figuring out like, this worked for me, this could work for you, and like, this is how we're going to take care of ourselves and one another.
And so little in research evolves that way. Talk about grassroots. And
Mm-hmm.
shame on us as a society and our institutions and our systemic problems that that was necessary. We have good minds and always have in our fields, and we could have been instrumental in bringing that to the forefront so much sooner. What have we learned in the wake of the harm reduction movement about the limitations or even the harms of an abstinence only standard to addiction treatment?
I think that our abstinence only approach, both in terms of drug prevention and safer sex education, doesn't even start. It starts with abstinence education and then it becomes safer sex education.
Hmm.
And then the fact that if people do go on to develop substance use problems, substance use disorders, or addictions, we just say, well, walk in the door of a treatment facility and get off drugs because clearly drugs are your problem and that's the only way to get help. So I would say that harm reduction has offered us and offers us to this day and in the future a possibility of learning the skills and tools to stay safe in your relationship with substances. I'll talk about substances first, that supports people who might just be engaging in experimentation, social use, recreational use, occasional use, all the way up to the person with addiction who can't afford a treatment facility right now, who has a wait list in their community for the next program to be available, who has a job that won't let them get away and they have childcare responsibilities so they can't start treatment right now. I would say that harm reduction actually offers us a variety of skills and tools for people all along the continuum of substance use to stay safe because the occasional and social user could benefit just as much from tools around learning about how to moderate drinking, how to alternate with water, how to make sure to drink on not to drink on an empty stomach, having a buddy or having a designated driver in the same way that someone who is an extremely heavy, maybe problematic drinker could also be engaged in remembering that they still need to make sure to make time to eat a meal. They still need to make sure there's strategies that they can take to delay the first drink of the day so that they're not drinking from the moment that they wake up. Thinking about lower potency drinks that they could switch to. Thinking about how to take care of my responsibilities and pay my bills first before going out to the store to buy that day's drinks, right? So, like all of the kinds of incremental ways that when we release ourselves from seeing abstinence as the only way to help, we can actually think of an infinite number of ways that we can help people to control their substance use, reduce their substance use, change their environments and contexts in which they're using, decide who they're using with, where they're using, when they're using. All of these things are also really important when it comes to being safe.
Wow. Can you give me some more examples of how someone might apply this to like
Hmm.
moderate alcohol use, for example, for
Yes,
simplicity's sake? Yeah.
absolutely. And I find that alcohol is often the easiest and most relatable example
Hmm.
for a lot of the people that I speak to. But by all means, people who use other substances can fill in the gaps and apply it to their own drug of choice, right? So one thing that we think about with alcohol consumption might be I find myself drinking too many days a week, right? I look back on my credit card statement. Last month, I found myself going out X number of nights in the month. And I know that one drink becomes another, becomes another. And then I do remember also waking up and being hungover a couple times for work. Or I remember I said something that I didn't need to say to my friend when I was out that night. Or it meant that I didn't do that thing at night that I was supposed to do because I stayed out too late, right? So, helping someone from a harm reduction approach might say, okay, so how many nights did you end up drinking last month? Okay. And the person might say, I drank 8 nights last month. And let's talk about what went well on the nights that went well and what happened on the nights that you wish could have happened differently, that you should have stopped sooner, or maybe you didn't need that extra drink, or you actually needed to get home because you had something to take care of, or you woke up feeling really crummy the next day. And let's compare and contrast what the difference was. So, how were you able to stop early on that one night? What do you think was different? Was it who you were with? Was it how that day went at work? Was it where you ended up in the bar that you went to, or were you drinking at home, or did they have a bottle, or what was it? And then thinking, and then like, let's contrast it. So that night that went too far, was it because you were with a different person? Was it because you had a bad day? Was it because you were dreading the next day? Let's think about it, right? And so, like, which day would you like more of? Which day would you like less of?
So you literally drill down on what went right when the person had a night out where they don't have any regrets. They didn't wake up in a vulnerability hangover or a shame spiral. And you compare and contrast that with, and the night of that didn't go the way you wanted, what was going on. And you examine what happened before, during, and after.
Mm-hmm.
Did you pregame? What was your mood coming into the night?
Mm-hmm.
Was there something that you were dreading in the next day, either
Mm-hmm.
at work or personally? And you're asking them to look at all of that in addition to who are you with, where'd you go, how many
Mm-hmm.
places did you go to? Did you go to the second location?
Mm-hmm. Approaching it with a curiosity without the shame blame game, or the you know better, or I should have done better, or I was really bad that night, I was so good that night. Removing kind of the morality, removing the labels, like removing all of that, and just being like, let's talk about the facts. How many was it? Oh, it was too many. But too many is different for different people, so let's just talk about numbers. Is that more than average? Is that typically what you can handle? Is that less than you typically do? And instead of like getting caught up in shaming and blaming yourself now after the fact, let's look at this together, and let's make some notes. Let's like make some observations. Let's come up with a plan. Let's say what numbers sound good to us in terms of how many days or how much money we'd like to spend, or what parameters we'd like to build around these kinds of practices. And like, let's think about trying something new.
You said something that I want to circle back to. You mentioned, like, let's look at whether or not you're using high potency or lower potency drinks that you're consuming. My understanding was that a shot of alcohol is the equivalent to a mixed drink, is the equivalent to a glass of wine, and the amounts compensate for each.
Mm-hmm.
So, in other words, if you were to have a mixed drink of a 2-ounce shot glass, it's not going to be the equivalent of a 2-ounce shot glass. So, the way we compensate for that is the mixed drink is a little bit bigger, and then it is the equivalent of that. You're actually getting the 2-ounce shot in your mixed drink. And then the same for a glass of wine. If you were to have a glass of wine in a lowball glass and, in what we normally have a mixed drink in, it wouldn't be the same amount
Yeah.
of alcohol as it would be in an actual wine glass. So, given that we have a way of equalizing all three categories of alcohol, what is the actual difference in high potency versus low potency drinking?
Well, depending on the potency, like things can build in to make it slower or faster, right? Because, for instance, a pint glass of beer is still a lower percentage of alcohol compared to a pint glass of a Long Island iced tea, generously poured, right? Because
Sure.
a Long Island iced tea contains multiple shots of
Hmm.
liquors, right? So
Every
that's
every
actually.
clear liquor.
And so you think of kind of even just how easy it might be to get something down, and like what you're used to and what you can tolerate, right? So some people can down a few beers, but their blood alcohol level may not look the same as someone who had a couple cocktails in the same pace. So beers tend to have, anywhere from like 6 to sometimes 10 to 12% alcohol, right?
Hmm.
But if you're drinking a Long Island iced tea, it is multiple shots of
Hmm.
higher potency alcohol. So you are getting the equivalent of the potency of the alcohol of maybe a couple beers in one Long Island iced tea, right?
Okay, that makes
And
sense to me.
right, or if you go to a bartender who's a heavy pourer, who likes you and is feeling friendly and feeling generous, they might give you a double in that gin and tonic, right? And you
Right,
and it might go down pretty quickly for you, whereas someone's still nursing their beer, right?
right.
Or where someone's still kind of sipping their wine, right? And wine is more of like 12 to 14% alcohol, so it's higher potency as well. So also, if you are a regular wine drinker, you could pour down a couple glasses of wine faster than someone could drink a lower potency beer. And so we need to kind of think about the regularity in which you are using these substances. How there's standardization, at least with beer and wine, because every bottle is going to tell you how much is in it. When someone's customizing and mixing cocktails, if they're not using a shot glass, every cocktail is kind of different in terms of how strong it is and how diluted it
Yep.
might be, whether there's ice in it, whether they put the ice in after, whether they put in the ice in before, all of
Mm-hmm.
these kinds of things, the kind of glass that they're pouring into. So this is where having conversations about what drinks you prefer, how much is actually in them, how quickly you consume them, all can kind of play out in what your blood alcohol level is going to be, and can look very different depending on your tolerance.
So are you saying to me that if I'm a regular wine consumer, that it's very likely, I mean, I can attest to this actually, that it's very likely that I'm going to drink 2 glasses of wine in the amount of time that it might take someone else to drink one drink?
It's possible. It's possible. And this is where being curious with your client or your patient, or even with yourself, if you're thinking about developing a harm reduction plan for yourself, is how quickly am I drinking this? This is a
Mm-hmm.
stronger drink. Am I treating it like a stronger drink, or am I treating it like it isn't a strong drink? Because if my liver can only metabolize a certain amount of alcohol every hour, am I drinking at a pace that's outpacing how my liver can process this? These are questions that
So
you can then
good.
ask yourself, right? And then say to yourself, should I be slowing down? Should I be alternating water? Should I be diluting this cocktail a little bit more? Should I have a chaser? All of these kinds of things. Or should I wait until the waitress comes by a second time before I ask for a refill? Should I have that plate of appetizers before ordering something else? All of those kinds of things. Or, should we stop and get some snacks? You know, all of these kinds of things you can have conversations about with someone. And this is also where, again, when you remove the judgment and just be like, what are your preferences? What do you like? What's your drink of choice? When you go out, what are some things that you like to drink? Tell me about them. Do you like them strong? Do you like them a little bit weaker? Do you like a heavy pour when you make them yourself? Or do you use a shot glass? Sometimes for people who make drinks at home, asking them to measure their drinks can be a
Yes.
great starting
Mm-hmm.
point. Measure your shots, measure your glasses, and only use certain kinds of glasses when you're at home to pour yourself a drink, so that you have a sense of how much you're actually consuming, whether it's a standard size or a heavy pour. And then, know there's a time and a place where if you want to have more, you should, right? And but being able to do so in a way that feels planned and conscious, that reduces the unintended negative consequences that you don't want to have to deal with, right? And if you can anticipate what might be a potential negative consequence, how can we preempt that? Maybe make it not happen.
What I love about what you just said is that you've given me so many other ways of helping clients to examine their usage and tweak seemingly unrelated variables so that their alcohol use is more controlled. Like, I never thought of watch the clock. Our bodies process a drink an hour, a
Mm-hmm.
standard drink an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And so you make that drink last for the entire hour because you're not allowed to have, or would that be a good rule? Do you think that
Yeah.
that would be an interesting social experiment to play
Mm-hmm.
with, to set a little timer so that you start your drink now and you're watching on your phone as that drink goes down? But it's a way of playing with the variables for someone for whom abstinence is just an unrealistic lifestyle choice.
Yeah, and what it is it's introducing a conscious awareness and mindfulness to the process, right? It is checking in with yourself in the process, and it removes the kind of automaticness or habitualness that sometimes we
Yeah.
fall into, that where we kind of go on autopilot. we just recreate the same patterns, the same habits, and we do the same thing over and over again, because this is just becomes our norm. This is just how we drink. This is how we socialize. This is how we go out. And it just offers you an opportunity to pause for a second and to say, and to be a little self-aware and to be like, is this what I want to try? Is this going to work for me? Is this how I want to do it?
What are some of the most common misconceptions about harm reduction?
One of the first misconceptions is that people who use drugs, including people with addictions, have no control over their substance use. Their drugs are, they're hijacked by drugs. They have a brain disease. They're incapable of rational thought. They make bad choices and they're impulsive. So that, expecting them to make incremental change is unrealistic. I think that there are a lot of stigmas that people hold and misconceptions that people have about people who use drugs and people with addictions that then make them not see that they are still capable of making positive choices for themselves, and safer choices for themselves. So I think that that's a really big one, and it's one of the most disturbing ones, and I think it's the most troubling. Another one is that harm reductionists are so-called enabling drug use. And what I would say is that actually our systems do not accept people for who they are. And we are the only place that people can sometimes turn when they've been rejected by their therapist, when they've been rejected by their psychiatrist, when they've been kicked out of a treatment facility, when they've been arrested, when their family has left them. Like harm reductions or programs are actually oftentimes the place that enables life and support and community for people who have been shunned and told that unless they change or unless they get better, that they aren't worthy of help and support. And so that is, I think, one of the biggest myths about harm reduction, is this idea that because we don't tell people this is how you're supposed to change, this is what qualifies as change, this is the timeline in which you have to change, and if you don't change fast enough and you don't stick with it, get out the door. That tough love mentality, that you need to hit your bottom mentality, that is such a dominant way and such a cruel often way that we hold people to often very unrealistic standards, actually has been such a driver for people not seeking help, for people dying on the streets, for people catching infectious diseases, for people hiding their use and then being found dead by a loved one in their home, for people who disappear and fall off the radar, who no longer come back because they figure no one cares anymore. I feel like there are countless people who that exact mentality have let falter. And I would argue that harm reduction says, you are worthy, you are loved, you deserve to be here, you matter. And what you're doing may be hurting yourself and it may have impacts on other people too. But the only way to help you is to love you and to create a space for you. So much of the logic of dominant culture is this idea that change comes through punishment. But those of us who work in the helping professions, we actually have learned that change comes when you have something called self-efficacy, when you feel like you are capable of changing. It comes when you have self-worth, when you believe you are worth changing for, when you are worthy of love, you are worthy of a full life, you are worthy of being here, when you have self-esteem, when you see yourself as a good person. And all of these things only happen if people can truly accept you for who you are. And instead, we have an entire system that says, you don't want to change? Well, we'll lock you up and then go see how that feels. And that should get you to somehow pull up your bootstraps and change. But oftentimes we take away those very tools that people need to build themselves up, because as soon as you walk out the door of a jail or a prison, now you have a criminal record. Good luck finding a job. Good luck being able to get custody of your kids. Good luck being able to find someone who wants to sign a lease to you. We actually, through punishment and criminalization, make it even harder for people to build the tools and the skills and the incremental confidence and belief in themselves and the actual structural needs that they have to have a successful and full life.
Am I wrong to not work with a client who shows up drunk?
So that's a great question. So what I would ask is this someone that you're practicing harm reduction with, or who you know has been drinking, or Are we
This
just
is
going to do
hypothetical. No,
this
it's
totally
totally
hypothetical?
hypothetical because,
Hmm.
well, I mean, I'm not going to say it's never happened. It has happened since COVID, ironically.
Yeah.
It's so interesting. The first 15 years of my career, Sheila, I worked with teenagers. They
Hmm.
never did that shit with me.
Hmm.
My teams were so, I can't even imagine that they would be afraid of me.
Hmm.
But they never did things like that with me.
Yeah.
And in the, I guess had been 12, 13, in the 11 years of working with young adults and adults since then, before the pandemic, that had never happened to me.
Yeah.
Since the pandemic, now that people show up, more often than not virtually, it has occasionally happened to me. So if
Okay.
somebody shows up and drinking is not necessarily a huge, well, let's use a real life example. Yeah, there was somebody for whom they were worried that their drinking was a problem. And
Hmm.
occasionally, which is to say, like maybe 4 times over the course of 2 years, they showed up clearly. It wasn't clear from the beginning, but I found that the words were
Yeah.
slurring as we
Hmm.
got through the session. And I actually didn't confront them in the session because I didn't think it would make a lot of sense to. Why would I
Yeah.
confront someone, first of all? It's their body. They're allowed to, they're home, they're safe, they're not driving a car.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is the middle of the workday and it is supposed to be therapy, but like I guess my social work training gave me
Hmm.
pause. And so the next session, I was more inclined to ask, what was it about the session that you may
Yeah.
have been dreading that caused you
Hmm.
to get a to drink before your 2 o'clock session in the
Yeah.
afternoon.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
So,
but
yeah, that's
but
great.
but beyond that, after those debriefs, I did say to the client, I said, so I don't want to work with you when you're drunk.
Mm.
So if you're drunk, what we have to work out how we're going to disengage in a way that doesn't hurt you, doesn't make you feel rejected, but hits
Mhm.
pause on our work until the next session. And I'm just wondering, is
Yeah.
that wrong? I don't just talk about mental health. I live it. And in my 20s, I built a boutique private practice that reflects the kind of therapy I always needed. It's called Alternatives Counseling, and we are now accepting new clients. If you've ever listened to this podcast and thought, I wish I had someone to walk me through this in real life, that is exactly what we do. We work with individuals and couples, especially high achievers, who are killing it in their careers and want that same success in their personal lives. We help you build deeper, healthier connections without losing yourself in the process. This is evidence-based therapy delivered by licensed therapists who are the best of the best. Change is hard. Doing it alone is harder. Come do the work with us at alternativescounseling.com.
So, again, I don't get in the business of what's right and wrong. It's all about your
Mm-hmm.
comfort, right?
How
And
could I be better, Sheila?
so, okay, well, it's you already gave me some good information that this person hadn't been driving, that they were calling in from home, and so, and it was something that became apparent to you over time. So, what I would offer, and again, this is based on the question that you're asking me, and I'm not giving, clinical guidance or support to people. But what I would offer is to be curious, to say that I'm noticing that you seem a little bit looser. Your words seem to be slurring a little bit, and I'm wondering if you had anything to drink today before we hopped on our call today. And to invite the person and to say, we've been talking about your relationship with alcohol. So I'm just curious, like, did you have a drink today? Tell me about what's going on, right? And so they might say, a variety of things, yes, I just got back from a lunch with a friend and it was hot and it was a sunny day and I had a break between meetings. So I thought I'd sit on the deck and open a beer and just kind of sit. And then I realized what time it was and I came and got on the call. Right. And you might say, okay, so tell me about this. Like, was this a leisurely break? Do you do this often? Is this part of the pattern that is concerning you that we've been talking about? Or do you
Mm-hmm.
actually feel like that, what's going on today is like you actually practicing moderate drinking? It just so happened to have that we had a session. And so you can ask those kinds of questions. But also, I would argue that It is quite informative and educational to see someone under the influence because it gives you information about who they get to be and what they get to access under the influence. So, my mentor, Andrew Tatarsky, a prominent harm reduction psychotherapist, he often said that substances help you access parts of yourself,
Parts of yourself.
but also that it can help you become someone, right? So sometimes it helps you out of your default state to become the person who's easygoing, the person who's less bothered, the person who speaks their mind, the person who's unafraid, the person who will say what they're really thinking. It may unlock your ability to cry, right? I'm otherwise very stoic. I'm otherwise very private, very keeping to myself. But I do find that when I'm out with the guys, I'm more likely to tell them that something's bothering me about my marriage after a couple drinks. Or I did finally tell my buddy about the problems that I'm having at work, but I didn't bring it up right away. It's something that I don't feel great about, but I did bring it up. And so, also as a therapist, being like, oh, I get to see now, usually you are a little bit stiffer. You are a little bit more controlled. You are a little bit this. And when you came in, you had a smile on your face. I
Huh.
see it now. I see what drinking gives you. You're
Wow.
always on. You're always in charge, in control. And I sometimes even feel that in our relationship where like I'm asking you questions and like you're not always giving me the clear response. And I know there's more that you want to say. And then that day that we were together and today, right now, I feel like I could ask you anything and you would answer it.
I mean, for real, this is internal family systems work. This is what are those parts of you that aren't able to come out normally? And it's about almost joining the social experiment as the investigator to see what parts of their personality are able to come to the surface that they're otherwise unable. So I wonder what the tipping point is. And this might not be an appropriate question for you because you're certainly not going to take responsibility, nor would I want you to as my clinical supervisor. But it does bring into question, is there a tipping point? Like, is there a
Mhm.
certain amount of clear intoxication at which it becomes inappropriate
Mhm.
for a therapist to continue a session? And
Yeah, I
maybe,
mean,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think that that's everyone's judgment, but I do think the broader question is, we're working on your alcohol goals. Is this the kind of drinking that you want to be doing in the middle of the day? Do you think that you can drink like this? Because I did notice, and do you have calls after this? We've talked about some of the troubles you're having with your boss and some of the stress that you're feeling. And what I'll tell you is you're not going to meet that deadline in this condition, right?
Wow.
And I'm concerned about that. But then also saying, like, do you want to treat this as a one off? Like, do you want to try to be sober next time? And in general, maybe give me a heads up when you notice that something is happening like this. But, like, also, is the fact that you're drinking today you testing me? Are you testing me?
And can you explain what that means?
Are you testing whether I will reject you?
Why would somebody test that?
Because they are on the edge of a precipice of maybe a level of intimacy with you that they're not comfortable with, right? So could it be that they're doing this to protect themselves and insulate themselves and get you to reject them first and to say,
Mm,
yes, I don't accept this behavior.
yep.
We're done.
Yeah.
Could it be that they wanted to show this part of you and they wanted to see if you would still accept them?
Because talk can be cheap.
Hmm.
And I can tell you till the end of days that this is a safe space for you. And I'm going to be in this as long as you want me to be in this. But how does somebody really know that if they don't
Hmm.
test it?
So there's so many layered reasons why this could happen. And I think for you as the provider, um, offering, inviting the client to reflect with you in this moment, what you're both observing. What is it like for you to be a little buzzed in this session with me? Does it make you want to say things to me?
Huh.
Does it make you not want to say certain things to me? Are you embarrassed? Are you, like, what are you feeling? What are you thinking?
Like literally exploring feelings in the state that they're in.
Yeah, I mean, it's information, and they may not be able to, depending on the level of tolerance of the person and the level of physical dependence that they have, they may or may not be able to engage in like deep exploration or problem solving or whatever, a lot of tremendous insights. But you can still glean information and have a conversation and have an interaction. Um, you can get them to write some notes down for them to think about later.
I want to share something with you that I'm experiencing right now, and it's a deep conflict in my values. There's a part of me that is like, but if I were to lean into this exploration when they're potentially too under the influence to even consent, how is that different from me going to a bar and hitting on a woman who is clearly too drunk to consent and hooking up with her?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that they've shown up to the session and they have an established relationship with you means that they still understood that they had an appointment and they didn't want to miss it, right?
Okay.
And so they're here with you. And I think making an observation and saying, do you still feel like you want to talk to me? Do you not want to talk to me? I mean, it's not like you're going to ask them to unlock some sort of family trauma under the influence, because they might say something like that or whatever. But I do think that you can have a pretty meaningful relationship conversation.
That is so good, and it was so important for you to mention. It's not like you're going to have, do a deep dive on their history of trauma under that state. And we have
Mm-mm.
a lot of therapists that listen to the podcast. I want to make that crystal clear that that would not be an appropriate use
No,
of,
you're not going to continue,
yeah,
one of those sessions, right? Like, but you are going to still use this opportunity in the same way that someone comes in and they're just crying the whole session,
hmm,
right? Something horrible happened. You're not going to dig into, well, should you have said that to her? No,
right,
you're there creating a container because I'm devastated that I had this horrible interaction and I've been counting down the minutes till I could just sob for an hour at you, right? In the same way
yeah.
that like not every session is going to engage in all these kinds of like various levels of deep exploration, but using it as an opportunity to have an observation, to reassess the relationship, to see what it was that happened that day, but to use it also as a piece of information for you if you are working on this person's drinking with them, that maybe it's starting to escalate. Maybe it's starting to become a problem. Now you have more information to be able to use in another session to be able to say, and when I saw you drinking, this is what I was concerned about. And now I know though also why you drink, because you were looser, because I could see how comfortable you were. And sometimes you don't feel comfortable in your own skin. And I'm wondering if maybe some of that stuff is what we should also be talking about in our sessions.
Harm reduction, as you pointed out at the top of the conversation, is not a new field. It's been around for many, many years. And some of us in New York, and I'm sure in other cities and in other places, have been talking about wanting to put this into practice for 5, 6, 7 years. And I'll ask you this question later on. It's really not appropriate for right here, but the point is that I've not been able to find training in harm
Mhm.
reduction. It's not as, or at least when I was looking for it, it didn't seem to be as widely available as I wish it were, because this is so rich in ways, especially I would imagine if this is happening to me in my practice, and it's not just one client with
Mhm.
whom this happened, it's several since the pandemic. I would imagine that this is something that is happening in other people's work experiences when they're working, certainly virtually and probably also in person, and
Mhm.
understanding that there are a variety of different ways to approach that, and to not necessarily view it through the lens of problem that must be solved or pathology that must be labeled, is really, really helpful.
Yeah, and I mean, you'll be the person telling them, can we take a minute for you to fill up a glass of water and maybe make a sandwich and come back and sit down and let's talk, right? Like, if anything, you have an opportunity with this person right now to model what they need to be
What
doing,
harm reduction looks like.
what they need to do to take care of themselves, and to say, what do we have going on for the rest of the afternoon today? So you've got work meetings. I would not recommend in this condition going into another work meeting.
Yeah.
But let's talk about your safety planning too. Like, we cannot have this happen again tomorrow. Like, right? Like, you've got work tomorrow, and tonight you got to pick up the kids. And how are we going to get you ready to have a plan for how to get the kids home? I don't think you should be driving today. Let's talk about it, right? These are all things that almost you can only do when you're with them and then be able to talk about it later. Like, imagine the value of that.
For sure, for sure. Handled properly the way you're describing, it sounds amazing. I can also imagine people listening to this, particularly the part of like, so do you have other work meetings today? I don't recommend that you show up in this condition for those work meetings. I can imagine listeners wondering the extent to which this is enabling rather than addressing the problem. And what do you say to that?
You're literally telling them, I don't think you should go to this work call. How is that enabling?
You're saving the person from the consequence of getting fired because they showed up drunk. And now you're quiet and you're looking at me with the look that a supervisor gives a supervisee, which really means, and so what? And there is not a so what.
And it's
I'm hitting
yeah,
a dead wall on the so what
and
because a
it's
person needs to make a living no matter what. If they don't make a living, they're going to lose their job, they're going to lose
and
custody
they
of their kids, they're
and
going to
they might
lose their
still
house.
and they might still hop on the call. They have autonomy. You're not sitting there with them, right? In your best judgment, you can cover yourself and say,
Right. I'm
I
not
told,
calling the
yeah,
boss for them and say, and cleaning up. The scenarios that are popping into my mind are all
mm-hmm,
the scenarios that we were trained in the abstinence only model
mm-hmm,
of this is what a codependent enabler looks like.
yeah,
It looks like cleaning up your husband's vomit and calling into work and saying, I'm sorry, he's got a terrible stomach flu or he's got neurovirus, and that's what we
yeah,
were taught for decades to
yeah,
believe is behavior that just extends this disease.
yeah. They could
They,
still go to the meeting. They could still drive drunk to go pick up their kids from school. All of these things could very well happen. They may never show up to another session with you again either if you shut this down, and maybe that's okay with you. Um, Again, this is where that level of risk tolerance, that relationship that you've built, the foundation that you have with this client, and what your priorities are in terms of like what you want to do with this person really come into play, right? If this is someone who by your assessment, engages in relatively low risk, but sometimes problematic use. And here you are in a moment where you're like, this was a lapse in judgment. And I'm going to give you professional advice about how to deal with this situation. But also, I do think this is something we should be talking about more deeply because I am concerned about what I'm seeing here. Maybe you've built enough of a foundation of trust that they do show up that next session and they're like, yeah, that was kind of wild that I showed up that way.
hmm,
And you're right. Like, I did call out for the rest of the day. I arranged for other childcare. And you know what? I did not drink for the rest of the week. I have not drunk since the last time I saw you. And again,
wow.
like, this is where you have to understand that there's actually an infinite number of possibilities that can happen. And at the end of the day, what you say can only do so much if the person does or does not follow it. I think there's also this mythology that somehow we can stop someone's substance use, or that somehow
Right.
that we can say something or do something or send somewhere, put them somewhere, and we somehow can control other people. And there's this myth of enabling in the same way that there's this myth that we can stop people. Just throwing people into jail stop them from using drugs. We have an overdose crisis in our jails and prisons right now because drugs are in our jails. There is alcohol in our jails. Jails are not drug-free spaces. Treatment
Right.
centers are not drug-free spaces. You go to certain kind of halfway houses and a variety of residential programs, people will find a way to bring substances in. We can say whatever we want. We can create whatever constraints we want to create, and we can believe that we have more control than we actually do on other people. But sometimes I find that when we give the most humanistic advice, when we offer people with the best of intentions, and when they know we've earned their trust and that they know that we are speaking from a good place, they're more likely to accept the advice.
Are there some situations in which harm reduction is ineffective?
I'd say the situations in which harm reduction, so-called, may not be. I think the tricky thing with our measures of effectiveness are that if we measure effectiveness only by days abstinent, you know, negative consequences reduced, all these other kinds of things, then we kind of pigeonhole ourselves. What I would say is that harm reduction can only go so far when people don't have their other basic needs met. If their psychiatric conditions may still be unmonitored and unmanaged, if they don't have a stable enough place to stay, if they don't have, access to regular food, harm reduction will help reduce some risks. But we also have to think about the 360 degrees, the biopsychosocial context that
Mm-hmm.
people are in, right? And so harm reduction can help reduce the risk of that use practice, that in that moment that you're using. But if you are in an unsafe environment, if you don't have a stable source of income, if you don't have food to eat regularly, harm reduction isn't going to fix all your problems in the same way that even treatment can't fix all your problems. If you don't have a place to lay your head after you walked out the door of a treatment facility where you successfully completed treatment, you will return to use the next day that you walk out of that treatment facility. So, we also have to think about what are the conditions that we're creating as a society and as a culture to facilitate safety and well-being so everyone's at a baseline level. You think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If we're
Mm-hmm.
not meeting people's basic needs, all of these other things that we're doing are window dressing
Mm-hmm.
because there are so many other challenges that people are facing. Does it matter that a person gets a sterile syringe if they don't have food to eat? I would say we still want to give them the sterile syringe, but we also need to think about it's not going to fill your stomach, right? Our society needs to do something to address broader hunger. If you don't have any meaningful relationships, if you don't feel like you have love and support in your life, having access to drug checking tools to make sure there's not fentanyl in your cocaine will only do so
Mm-hmm.
much. But like if you are still lonely and sad and in a place of despair and isolation, you may still end up using chaotically, right? So, I don't know if that answers your question, but I'd say that all of our interventions, all of our approaches, whether it's abstinence-based treatment or a harm reduction approach, they can only do so much in a world with such tremendous inequities that we have, and the fact that people are often living and navigating unlivable circumstances. And even a person who uses drugs will tell you, my drug use is only one fraction of my life, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But my life is so much bigger than it. And if there's chaos in all the other parts of my life that predated my substance use that I'm actually using substances to address, you helping me be safer about my drug use or getting me to stop using drugs isn't going to get rid of all my problems. Because I think that's the other mythology, right? Is treatment going to solve all your problems too? Not
No, for sure
necessarily,
not.
right? And in the same way, is arresting our way out of this problem going to solve drug problems for all people? No, especially if the day they walk out of the their incarceration for their drug charge or, any other kind of offense, they don't have a place to go. So, as a social worker, I would say that there's no such thing as any intervention that we could hang our hat on and say this is going to be the be all end all because people need community, people need food, people need meaningful work or meaningful purpose in their life. People need family.
In the example I was thinking of, a fictitious Joe has been binge drinking for 15 years, is in his early 40s, and tries harm reduction. That
Mhm,
allows him to continue his drug usage for another 5 years.
mhm,
His liver enzymes were elevated at the beginning of that 5 years when he
mhm.
chose harm reduction instead of an abstinence only route. And at the end of 5 years, he now has cirrhosis or liver
Yeah,
failure.
yeah. So, that's a great question. So, what I'll tell you is that if we sent him to abstinence-based treatment, only 40% of people who start treatment in any given year, abstinence-based treatment, complete it. So 60% of people who start addiction treatment in any given year don't finish it. They get kicked out for violating terms. They leave AMA against medical advice. They get bumped up to a higher level of care or some other reason they don't finish the treatment episode. And
Huh.
so I would argue that 60% of people don't finish the treatment that they start. And the majority of people, even after finishing abstinence only treatment, still use at least once in that first year when they get out.
I wonder if part of
And
the reason why they discharge with such liberal zest is because it increases their efficacy rates. Because if they get rid of people, if they're,
yeah,
if they're stumbling while they're in the program,
yeah,
you have a much better likelihood of maintaining
yeah.
sobriety, abstinence, if you make it through an entire program. And if you get rid of the people who are using during that, your efficacy rates are just going to be
Yeah,
higher.
because harm reductionists talk about abstinence all the time. I refer clients to abstinent-based treatment all the time, and I had clients who came in and who said, after picking up sterile needles at the needle exchange, after a while they were like, "I want to give detox a shot," and so they'd go to detox. And a lot of people see harm reduction programs as pathways to treatment, and a lot of people initiate abstinence directly from starting with a harm reduction approach first because they build up enough confidence to cut down and moderate, and then eventually
Hmm.
they're like, "I don't want to do this anymore." So the problem is that with that heavy drinker that you're describing, we could send him to treatment. And oftentimes their harm reduction therapist might say, "I am concerned about your drinking. Have you thought about whether you're ready for detox?" Because also when you're drinking at that level, you need to be through medical detox. You cannot do a cold turkey detoxification on your own. You should do it in medical setting. "I'd like to send you to detox." A lot of times people leave detox within the first day or two because of the discomfort of going through withdrawal, and they'd rather
Hmm.
go back to drinking, right? And they leave AMA. And so the other thing is that then that person has nowhere to go. And so you have to be able to say, "I think that this drinking is becoming a problem. And do you think you're ready to try detox? Because I know your tolerance is getting out of control. Your eyes are getting yellow. You're losing a lot of weight. Would you like to try to do this?" And to offer that referral and to say that, "I'm willing to, talk to you on the phone while you're there. We can still stay in touch. But also, if you get out, like, you can still call me." Because right now there's nothing. And so this is why I called my book The Harm Reduction Gap, because literally without harm reduction, treatment will never fill that gap. Treatment will never meet the needs in the community fully. It's estimated that in any given year, about 90% of people who meet criteria for an addiction did not get treatment that year. Only 10% of people with addictions get treatment in any given year at a
Jesus.
specialty substance use treatment facility. And that's just in a year, right? So only 10% of people are going to treatment. And of those 10%, as I just told you, only 40% of them will successfully complete that treatment episode. 60% will not. They will get bumped up to another level of care. They'll get kicked out. They'll leave themselves, right? But then I just told you as well, the majority of people do dip and dabble even in that first year that they leave treatment. And a lot of times your insurance will not pay for you to go back to treatment twice in a year or 3 times in a year.
Right.
And a lot of
Hmm.
times you don't have that kind of PTO. You don't have someone paying your rent. You don't have the ability to do anything. And at that point, I would say that's the only place where harm reduction fits in, because we will
Right.
not turn you away. We will be the ones to create the container for you. We will hold you and be there with you through this all, because actually, the alternative to treatment right now is death. And even going through
Wow.
treatment all the way doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get everything you need, because we do not offer people any kind of support if they fail treatment, if they air quote fail treatment.
That is absolutely true. There is nothing if they fail treatment.
There's nothing if they fail treatment. And so I say they fall into the harm reduction gap. The safety net that could be there to hold them, the people rejected from treatment, the people shunned from treatment, the people dropped out from treatment, the people who finished treatment and went right back to using.
Hmm. Or months or years later stumbled.
So I think that sometimes the premise that people are operating under, being like, when does harm reduction not work? When do people, what are the limits of harm reduction? What if this person's killing themselves using drugs? They would be killing themselves using drugs even without us, because the rejection of the treatment facility and then having no formal professional or support network like us as the providers, as the harm reduction providers, to care for them. Who's going to care for them?
So it's essentially, if not us, then
Then who?
nothing.
Then nothing.
Yeah.
And so, the premise of my book for the average person was to really help people understand that as soon as you finish your abstinence-based drug DARE prevention education, I was a product of DARE. As soon as I had my first drink of alcohol, as soon as I had my first puff of the cigarette, I no longer had any use for what I learned in drug prevention because I violated the terms. Now I was out,
Hmm.
I was out, to the races. because
Yep.
now it was about figuring out how to stay safe, how to keep myself safe, how to use safely, how to moderate or manage my use. And thank God I never developed an addiction. But in our current system of care, you develop an addiction, there's only one place to go to a treatment facility.
Yes.
And if you don't work for the treatment facility, it's you that's the problem. It's not the treatment facility. You're the problem because you weren't ready to go by the rules. You were in denial. You were resistant to care. You didn't think that you needed help. Well, look where your way got you. And let's wait until you hit bottom to come back if you survive and if you're lucky enough to go to treatment. And then when you go through treatment, you should do it all in one shot. And when you come out, you better have gotten with it and you better be able to figure it out. And sure, you don't have a place to live when you get out. Sure, you lost your job because going away for treatment for a couple of weeks meant that you couldn't work anymore. Sure, you can't pay for rent anymore. But yes, stay sober, please.
So valid. It's so valid, it's so relatable. So if a therapist listening to this wants to be trained in harm reduction, where should they start? And do you think it's important for them to like review their own internal way of viewing addiction and the world before they commit to that? Like, is there a mindset shift that has to happen?
I think so. I mean, I really do. They're obviously having fear for your clients and their safety and well-being is going to be an ever-present thing. But to be honest, many of you are working with clients who are actively using drugs right now who would never have told you, who you absolutely do not know are using drugs. 50% of people over the age of 12 in America used alcohol, tobacco, nicotine, cannabis, cocaine, any of these drugs in the past year,
Okay. Okay.
right?
And
So
you
people,
don't think they're necessarily disclosing that.
why would they? A lot of people
Yeah.
have good reason not to, right? As we just said, talking, disclosing about your substance, especially if it's a more highly stigmatized one, or if it's a provider who you haven't felt out yet. Would your provider get that sometimes you like to do K?
Right.
Would your provider understand that you like to take gummies to go to bed sometimes? Maybe more so if you live in a legalized state, but if you don't live in a legalized state, you may not want to report it because it could mean that your child custody could be at risk, right? Or because you're a federal employee or because you work in a certain kind of job. Like in theory, because you're doing this therapy through your EAP, this could end up in your file. This could be something that could affect your ability to keep your job.
So
So
given that you would imagine that there does need to be like a mindset shift before a therapist or even to be trained in harm reduction. But given the fact that all of us probably have someone or some people on our
mhm.
current caseload that are using on a regular basis and not disclosing that to us, we should get trained in harm reduction.
Yeah, I mean, it's estimated that anywhere from 10 to 15% of the population meets criteria for a substance use disorder. And most of those folks also have a co-occurring mental health disorder. So it may be that they're seeking care for you for that mental health disorder, but it may be that they're not disclosing their substance use to you, right? In a way
Right.
that could be informative to your care. So I think first and foremost, yes, I think we need to operate from a place where it's helpful to kind of have more of a neutral, pragmatic approach to understanding that people use substances. The most statistically most likely substance that your clients are using is alcohol, but it's
Hmm.
also a neurotoxin. And it is the substance for which, we've lost, over 1.2 million people due to a drug overdose since 2000, right? Since this overdose crisis started. But we lose hundreds of thousands of people per year to alcohol related causes.
Hmm.
Um, we are still at this time, about 1 in 10 deaths can be traced back to tobacco consumption to in 2024, 2025.
That's
So
astounding.
people are dying of tobacco related causes, even if they're now a recovered smoker and they're not smoking anymore, even if they didn't smoke, but their parents did when they were kids growing up. You know, tobacco related causes are a leading cause of death still to this day, even at this time where, smoking rates are down. Alcohol related harms are still prevalent, and the majority of those harms are non fatal harms, but they are affecting people's day to day lives. And alcohol is also still claiming lives. And so, and then, rates of cannabis use, I'd say marijuana or cannabis is like the next biggest category of which, people use substances. But then depending on who you're working with, the use of psychedelics is increasing, psilocybin mushrooms, MDMA. If you work with certain communities and in certain parts of the country, methamphetamine is very prevalent. And again, the vast majority of people who use any of these substances are occasional or recreational users. The people who have substance use disorders are always a smaller subset of the broader population. And so again, thinking about that, you have clients who might just be doing a couple bumps, doing a couple lines, dropping a tab at a festival. But substance use is part of our day-to-day lives. And I think it does require a paradigm shift for all of us as providers, and really understanding that we live in a world in which wanting to alter your consciousness is a part of humanity and life and living in a world. Many of us use recreationally, socially, for all these different reasons. Some of
And
us
has
are
been since the beginning of
since the beginning
time.
of time. And so it's really about creating an invitation for people to tell you where substance use fits into their life, and offering opportunities to explore, making sure that you're always feeling in control when you decide to use. You're not using because you're sad. You're using because you want to enhance an experience. You're not using because everyone else is using. You're using because you want to use. You are stopping because you're ready to stop. Whatever. Like all of those things are made autonomously, and like you can have so many more productive conversations with people when you approach substance use from a value neutral place, and a place of curiosity, a place of understanding that substances fit into people's lives for a variety of reasons, and really helping people feel like, yeah, I want to make sure you feel control. I want to make sure you feel like you can still reach your goals, and that this is part of a full life, that substance use is a small slice of a full life.
And so, is there a gold standard, one, two, or three places we can point therapists to get the training in harm reduction?
So yeah, I mean, I think that there are harm reduction trainings, mostly in the hubs of where harm reduction is happening. So here in New York City, we've got a number of harm reduction psychotherapy providers and clinics and people who do trainings. As I mentioned, Andrew Tatarsky, my former mentor, is here in New York City. There's a number of prominent harm reduction psychotherapists who do really great work here. There's a number of centers that do trainings in the Chicagoland area and that provide those kinds of services. And then like Oakland and San Francisco, the Center for Harm Reduction Therapy out there does a variety of trainings for providers as well. But yeah, I mean, if this is an area you want to move in, it can only help your practice and it can only help your relationships with your clients, because people use drugs. They come in all shapes and forms. People have all kinds of relationships with the substances in their lives. And depending on how much you want to make that a part of the work that you do, it is showing up in your work in one way or another.
Yeah, I can't imagine having no familiarity with the world of substance abuse or addiction. I'm really lucky because I'm not naturally drawn to it. It was one of my first jobs out of school, but I'm so grateful for that training, however outdated it is, because it gave me something. I can have conversations with people around it. I have had the privilege of, you know, witnessing half a dozen clients in recent years make their own decisions to go into treatment and
Mhm.
achieve their goals and build lives that they feel really proud of. And
Yeah.
so, I agree with you. We every therapist should be trained in some level of this. And for someone listening who isn't a professional but is curious about learning about harm reduction, maybe they want to cut back themselves or support someone they love. What does trying it out realistically look like? Do they do it themselves, or is there a program that they can join?
Yeah, so there's if you're interested also in practicing harm reduction therapy, those centers that I mentioned do in-person and virtual harm reduction trainings, but there's a number of books that are out there that actually teach clinicians about harm reduction therapy as well. So Andrew Tatarsky wrote a co-edited book on practicing harm reduction psychotherapy. Pat Denning and Jeannie Little have written 2 volumes now of a harm reduction therapy guidebook series. Recently, Seema Cliff-Asefi and Susan Collins, both from the Washington area, wrote a book on practicing harm reduction counseling that is out. So there's a number of books like that. And if you're interested in helping a loved one around their substance use, I would highly recommend learning about CRAFT, which is CRAFT. It's Community Reinforcement and Family Training. And that is an essential approach, I believe, and an alternative to this tough love, um, you must hit your bottom kind of approach that a lot of people might get from 12-step meetings, that if you tried that approach and it didn't work for you, craft actually is a really great program. There's a great center in New York City called the Center for Motivation and Change, and I will give you the information about the book that team actually wrote on it. There's another book called How to Get Your Loved One Help Without Begging, Pleading, Nagging. And so I find that craft is a really helpful, concrete way to help families learn like how to set boundaries, but how to also affirm those boundaries with love, how to also offer like support and, alternatives, how to have productive conversations, because having productive
Yeah.
conversations can be hard. So they give you a lot of tips on how to have conversations. I think that, yeah, between those books on harm reduction psychotherapy, which I can share the links to you with, and then also some of these books on craft, I think craft is a really great strategy. And then just to kind of plug that, Amanda Ryman and Barry Lesson have a book that's coming out this fall on harm reduction therapy for adolescents,
Wow,
which is going to
that's
be really
great.
exciting. I have a co-authored book on harm reduction therapy that should be coming out next year with Heather Lee. And if people are looking for support around alcohol specifically, HAM's harm reduction, abstinence, and moderation support is a great book that I'll also share with you all. And then moderation management is a great support group for people who want to moderate their drinking. They have some really clear-cut formulas on how to moderate drinking. They have a workbook, they have guidelines, and they have online support groups you can join. Harm Reduction Works is also a really great support group and a Facebook group where you can join the Facebook group and then get notified when the Zoom meetings are. And it's for people to get support online from other people exploring harm reduction as a goal for their substance use. Yeah.
I will link to every one of those resources in the show notes. Also, what do you think about the harm reduction apps? I've been using those for a few years with my clients.
I'm not
Are you
familiar.
familiar?
No.
Yeah. There's one in particular called Sunny that one of my clients uses and loves. It's more about providing feedback and information about how your body is changing for the better as you reduce the amount of alcohol you're consuming over the course of a week, either
Hmm.
through like sober days or numbers of drinks that you drink when you do drink. And I'm really surprised how motivating that positive information is to people because we know that people are better motivated through pain than pleasure, to avoid pain than to seek out pleasure. But I suppose there's some of that in the information because when they're seeing that they're getting notifications that their livers are repairing, that's very much avoiding pain by continuing on that road.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I think that praise and positive reinforcement and incremental wins and small wins, I think are far more motivating for sustaining change than degradation, punishment, cruelty, shame, and blame.
Yeah. And always my final question, Sheila, where can people find out more about you?
You could find me on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on X and Blue Sky, all at My Harm Reduction, MY Harm Reduction. I also have a website, SheilaVakharia.com. I work at a great organization that does drug policy reform called the Drug Policy Alliance. You can learn more about us at drugpolicy.org and drugpolicy.org on all of the major platforms. And if you want to read my book, it's called The Harm Reduction Gap. I highly recommend it. It was meant specifically for people who are still trying to wrap their head around where does harm reduction fit into our broader continuum of care. I wrote it specifically with non-believers in mind, so hopefully you find it accessible and easier to read, and hopefully should have my next co-authored book out next year.
You are a gem, man. Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
congratulations. I understand you just recently were promoted.
Yes, thank you so much.
Of course, Sheila, I could keep going with you for hours, but I've got to let you go. And for you, my listener, don't go anywhere. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
That was my conversation with Sheila. And now here's the part where it's just you and me. What I keep coming back to is this: harm reduction isn't just about drugs, it's about how we move through life. We use it everywhere, actually. We wear seatbelts, we put on sunscreen, We cut back on dessert instead of eliminating it altogether. Harm reduction is simply the recognition that change can happen in small steps. It asks us to stop measuring success in absolutes, to trade judgment for compassion. The truth is, harm reduction is radical because it insists that people are worth saving, even if they're not ready to change in the ways that we think they should. That's not just a policy shift, that is a cultural one. And it reminds me that progress doesn't always look like perfection. Sometimes the smallest step forward is the biggest victory. We Need to Talk with Dr. Darcy Sterling is a Sterling Standard production. Editing and sound engineering is by Bart McGall. Our theme music is by Trending Music. Special thanks to Amanda Christiani and Robin Jensen. Please show me some love and follow this show wherever you're watching it or hearing it. As you know, I want to keep making these episodes for you, so for me to keep doing that, you've got to follow and ideally share this episode with a friend or two. We'll be back on Tuesday with another episode packed with the relationship, dating, and mental health hacks you've come to expect. References are always linked in the show notes. I'll see you soon.